do the hair flip
All
stuff.
right. This is how we start. This is perfect. All right. Welcome everyone to Oasis Frontier Founders. This is the very first episode. Well, if you've heard of Oasis Onchain, this is kind of a part, but something separate at the same time with Oasis Onchain, which is a frontier tech founder retreat and symposium that we do in the Bahamas every year. And it's going to be in January 2026. But for now, we're going to talk to Kim Adams, who is the founder of Onchain City, and just to talk about what does it mean? Well, what does it mean to be an on-chain city in the first place? What does it look like to have governments interacting on chain, and why the need for this in the first place? And Kim, we'll jump straight to you. So I have to say, Kim is someone I've known for a long time. Kim is part of the Oasis community. She's also, been working with me in different ways since Caribbean Blockchain Alliance back in the day. And she's also been in and around the space in so many ways, working throughout DeFi, working throughout kind of everything, really. But yeah, Kim, I don't know if you want to dive into your background, if you want to just jump into what you're doing now. But I
Yeah.
want you to talk a little bit about how you got here.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Steph. It feels like we're still in the Bahamas with this blue background and the hair flip. I'm loving it. And I can't wait for Oasis on Chain in January. So I'm looking forward to that. Some background, I have been tirelessly building in the crypto space for the last 10 years. Did not realize how fast time flew by. Worked with some interesting companies. One was Bit, stuff that you might be familiar with. They kind of created the concept of CBDCs by accident. There was not the intention to create this like government surveillance token, but they memed that into existence because we had a crypto exchange. People wanted to buy Bitcoin. They would give us Barbados dollar. We would have to figure out how to convert that to USD and then credit them with USDT and do that swap. And at that time, Kolu was a big thing, and Kolu had like the Color Coin protocol where you can launch tokens on top of the Bitcoin protocol. So we're like, let's just tokenize the Barbados dollar. We did that, scaled it to thousands of merchants, and then later the Central Bank of Barbados was just like, nope, that is not going to fly. You can't just go and export the currency that way. There's policies and frameworks that underpins a currency, and so that kind of got unwinded. But the company kind of still stuck around and have been doing some interesting stuff within the space. After that, I worked with some other exchanges, one in Switzerland, worked with Layer One, worked with the Uniswap Foundation, building out the cross-chain assessment framework that is widely used in the bridging space. I had my own bridging protocol at one point in time. I randomly helped to establish the Barbados embassy here in the UAE, and then I went into venture capital with Equus Ventures for the past 2 years. So it's kind of like just a bunch of random stuff. And I was thinking about it recently. I now see how it all comes together because, like, having the opportunity to work with governments, having the opportunity to work with like highly technical expertise, having the opportunity to work on the distribution front and communication front. Um, as a founder now, I see how pivotal, how like critical, like having knowledge in all of these verticals is for building on-chain city specifically.
Yeah. And like I said, that's a very extensive background. Kim is actually an OG. Because even thinking about Kolu and colored coins, we haven't heard those words in a while, give or take. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, Kim is from Barbados and lives right now in Dubai. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Dubai is my new home, but I do love and miss Barbados.
I can imagine. You so there was a quote that you used in a document that I read for Onchain City that basically said the system isn't designed for the new generation, which I thought was a bar. But I also think it really explains why you're doing this, and I'd love for you to jump into that, like your experiences with why you think this system isn't set up for someone like you. You can explain.
So this resonates with me quite a bit because I have been a digital native and a crypto native for my entire adult life. I started when I was 17, I'm 27 now. Never used a bank account. I've never worked a traditional corporate job before. Everything has been online, even my education. I did 1 year computer science at our local university, and then I realized I could just use YouTube, um, which I did. And so I just basically learned everything online and figured out how to get around and figure my life out. When I would travel, I would, give someone money and say, "Hey, can I borrow this card?" Or "Hey, can you like buy this thing for me?" Or I would try to use sites like Bitrefill, Travala, etc. Um, and so I somehow unintentionally kind of figured out how to live outside the system, but a lot of it was due to ignorance and just survival. Because when I tried to go the whole bank account route and set up and get a credit card and whatnot, they were like, your max spending limit is 20K USD. And if you want to spend more of that when you travel, you need to apply to the Central Bank of Barbados, which was like, I don't have time for that. Um, and so I basically live my entire life on chain and digital. One notable one I would mention is for my visa. I built my reputation. I was working with this cool company, and I was still struggling to get a US visa. I applied twice. I got rejected. And the third time was when I called up a friend who worked in the Navy SEAL, and I asked them if they could call the embassy in Barbados and give me my visa. And that's how I got my US visa. So, like, all of the stuff that I had done online had no representation in the physical world. You basically have like the state ID, which is like the civil record of who you are, but it doesn't really tell you like what that person is capable of or anything that they've done. And so there's this huge disconnect between being a citizen of an actual country and being an internet citizen, which we all are, especially if you're watching this. And so a lot of what I realized is that this is what the world is moving towards. People born today cannot imagine a society without this digitally interconnected means. And so a bridge needs to be built from this to the physical world that allows you to make that make your presence online useful in the real world. And that's a lot of what Onchain City is solving for, building the bridge from the legacy system to the modern digital system. Hopefully, that will solve the problem um, of an infrastructure designed for future generations.
I love that. That's, I mean, one, it's a great story. Two, it resonates so strongly. I think, just like you said, there is a massive gap, especially for people like us who are in the global south in general. There's so many things that just don't work, especially when we try to put things together between the physical and the digital, and there's just nothing there. Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, the entire goal of combining the two is a very daunting task. Even the idea of a government on chain or a location or a city on chain is a daunting task. What do you plan to do? What's your plan to make this a reality?
Um, honestly, that has been the hardest thing to figure out because it's like you have to go to each government individually, and first bring them on chain, and then be able to then take these services and offer them to the on-chain city citizens. So the plan right now is to work with whoever is moving. The UAE is pretty good when it comes to innovation and being at the frontier of these types of technologies. Surprisingly, a lot of countries in South America, as well as the Caribbean, which is interesting. So I know in the Caribbean, like if there was a digital corporate registry that was considered high tech. um, but we're like at this interesting stage where small island nations are now kind of leapfrogging the digital infrastructure, and they're going to the most advanced one because they have to compete at a global level, and it's sort of like a no-brainer if your system is digital. And so it's just working with the players who have a mandate to digitalize and come on chain, but also showing them what it unlocks for their economy. Crypto and blockchain system solves for composability. And the reason why like all of these government databases are so siloed is because of how they're structured. And so a lot of it is on the education side and working with governments individually,
Yeah, so it's a lot of just explaining to people how this works, which is not fun.
pretty much.
But so this also
Someone has
covers
to do it.
someone has to do it. Yeah, you Godspeed. Because I remember with Caribbean Blockchain Alliance as well, one of the biggest things I wanted to accomplish was to create a kind of um, regulatory system where you had Bahamas, Barbados, Bermuda, basically, who were actually paying attention to what was going on in blockchain, but the rest of the countries in the region were very behind or just not paying attention. My I guess number one desire was to get all of them on the same page and have kind of a regional regulatory environment. It's
You
extremely
know, it's crazy. So guys, I don't I don't know if you know this about Stefan, but Stefan was pushing a lot of what the US is now doing today with crypto regulation. And what is interesting is that, and kind of sad at the same time, is that the Caribbean was at the frontier of all of this stuff, like stablecoin innovation, like policy. Um, and once again, I guess we were a bit too averse. Um, But I think now, naturally, the Caribbean was sort of just like follow whatever the US is doing.
and there's always time to catch up. So we'll see. Yeah, but I appreciate that. By the way, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of unforgiving work.
Honestly, like, I do think it is a good time to restart CPA. Market timing plays a huge role in a lot of these things.
Timing is everything.
Yeah, it's like RWAs. Remember, like the STO cycle where everyone was launching security tokens, and we had the notion of bringing equities on chain, etc. We know it logically made sense, but the market wasn't ready for it. And I think it's sort of the same thing with policy here.
Yeah, no, 100%. So what do you also with Onchain City? Obviously, there's the money component in different ways, whether it's stablecoins, CBDCs, whatever. There's also visas. There's also identity. What do you, I guess, what are you looking at in terms of that, and how do you kind of bring it all together in one kind of
Yeah.
package?
So you can think of On-Chain City as an aggregator for government services. So we basically wrap the sovereignty of various government services, and bring them on chain and make them accessible to our citizens. For example, the ability to set up a company, the ability to open up a bank account with a real IBM number, IBN, IBAN number,
I
sorry,
ban. Yeah.
IBAN number, the ability to apply for a visa, the ability to get health insurance, etc. Basically, all of the things that you would need when you go to a physical city, you have access to as an on-chain city citizen. Um, and I kind of look at it as these are micro functions within a government. And we partner with the government to make them a host nation. So, for example, the Bahamas might be offering like the corporate registry. Barbados might be offering banking. And so, as an on-chain citizen, you have the ability to say, hey, okay, I don't want to do my corporate registration in Barbados, but I'll do it in the Bahamas, and I can easily access that through Onchain City. And then I also want to do my bank account in Barbados, and they're not beholden to a model. Whereas, like, if you go to a country to like transact or interact with certain services, you need like a local card. You don't need that. This in this case, you can kind of opt in and out of the various services that you want.
Okay, that's really fascinating because it's like it gives you as a person a lot of flexibility in terms of like what kind of system, what kind of process you want to go through. That's a huge unlock. That's actually really interesting. Okay.
The goal is so that you never have to interact with the traditional government experience that you would have when you go and have to deal with them. Whether it's applying for a visa or setting up a bank account, it should be extremely seamless.
So yeah, no, that's kind of amazing. I really like that. What I guess even at this early stage, what kind of pushback are you getting? Not in terms of like obviously there's still that education component where you still have to explain to people what this is, but more in terms of okay, but I want people to use this system. I don't want people to be able to go around it, you know?
Yeah. So the pushback is honestly on the data privacy side of things, and that's where we've been spending a lot of time exploring the CKPs and so forth. But the government generally care about money laundering and threats to the national security, and as long as you have enough mechanisms in place to protect that, then you're typically fine. So I would say it's less about them being concerned of people going around their system and more of them concerned about, is this a threat, and what is like the privacy component, because at least my pitch has been, right now, in order for people to interact with these services and interact with all of these products that your ecosystem is offering, they sort of have to be already plugged into it. And so now you have the ability to export these products to the virtual layer, which means you have way more access to potential customers who could be leveraging your sovereignty and your services.
So yeah, I think that makes sense, and that actually shows that a lot of these governments, a lot of these countries can be or could be more accepting of this after they really understand what needs to be in place, and they're like, oh, if we already have this stuff in place, we don't have to worry too much about the externalities or problems with that. That that's actually hopeful. This means it's something that really can be done.
Oh yeah, and I think like I feel very fortunate to be in the UAE because, as I mentioned, they are at the frontier of a lot of these things, and they are willing to experiment and see what works. And all it takes is for one person to try it, see that it succeeds, and then everyone sorts of come on board, because the incentives make sense. If it increases your bottom line, like, why not?
Everyone waits for the first one to show that it works. Who is your? I mean, obviously, your clients or your user base are technically the governments themselves, but who do you see as the earliest adopters? Obviously, as digital natives and crypto natives, for example. Um, but what do you see in terms of like regional? Like who are the first? You know, what are the regional users that you see coming?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot in the APAC region, the Caribbean, South America, and MENA specifically. Um, One low-hanging fruit that we have been experimenting with is actually on the events side of things, whereby the there's events hosted in these countries, and the event is an opportunity for them to attract human capital into the country. And so right now, let's say I'm going to Dev Connect and I need an Argentina visa. I still have to go through that process of applying for a visa and given all my documentation, etc. And so in an idealistic world, you come to Onchain City, and because you have a very expressive digital passport where they everything is sort of there, you can see your reputation, you can see your trust circle, you can see everything that you've done, you can see your existence state ID. Um, we can quickly validate, okay, this person passes all the checks and balances, and so just give them a visa. There's no need to wait like 6 to 10 weeks
Exactly.
for a visa and go through all these hoops. And so we've been pitching that to a few governments, and I'm very surprised how receptive they are. Even the UAE, the UAE has a mandate to attract 1 million AI talent by 2027. Um, with the current system that they have right now, that's going to take a long time and a lot of heavy lifting. With the on-chain city digital passport and our mechanism, they can fast track a lot of them. So it's just targeting these initiatives. Events is a low-hanging one, and the UAE initiative.
So you're already solving their direct issues. That's kind of incredible. Okay, that's really interesting. I mean,
Trying.
yeah, it's worth doing. Wow, that's Kim. This is actually pretty incredible. I would love to see this. I mean, just like you said, being able to this is the dream. Being able to get an accepted visa pretty much instantly. It's like I'm a regular person. I know what I'm doing. I'm not like a criminal or something. Let me in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you know why like it takes so long? It's because you have all of these databases that are all over the place, and you're just waiting for Shari from that department to like send over this other thing to John. And like that's why these things take long, not because they're hard to do or it's complicated. The checks that they do on like Interpol and FBI and OFAC, very like there's just APIs that is being called and it's saying yay or nay that person is on the list or not. So it's kind of like the same thing in the payment space in the sense that like settlement for money could be like instant if they wanted to, but there's a lot of middlemen and unnecessary bureaucracy because it justifies the system collecting all the fees and operating the way it does and keeping people employed. So it's the same thing at these other other levels.
Yeah, no, 100%. Shout out to Shari and John. I hope y'all get it together.
Sorry, Shari and John.
But you're absolutely right. It's just inefficient systems and the need to keep it going because that's either status quo or that's how we keep employment or things like that. Um, I'd love to dive into the tech stack if I don't know how much you're open to revealing, but I'd love to know what you're actually using. Obviously, you mentioned with visas. I assume there is some form of like DIDs or verifiable credentials or something like that.
Yeah. So we're actually right now building out the digital passport technical infrastructure, and we've spoken to multiple DID protocols. We don't necessarily want to build it from the ground up, but we wanted to sort of aggregate your profile. Very theoretical, but imagine you create the passport instance. That passport instance can validate your actual passport. Hypothetically, you want to connect your biometrics, like your World ID or something of that sort. You can do it, you can stack it there. You can build out your trust circles so you can see who is vouching for you, and so forth. There's the reputation layer. And so we're aggregating all of this into a digital passport. So it's like, here is my digital representation of me, as well as my state ID and the civil records that the government has on file. The other thing that we are exploring is zero knowledge proofs, because there's a lot of privacy concerns when it comes to exposing this type of data. I mean, in any case, when someone travels and open up a bank account and register their business, they do provide all of this information freely. But we want to kind of leapfrog to a society where that isn't the case, and you can maintain a level of privacy and sovereignty with your data. So we are experimenting with that. One, I don't know if I should say this now, but okay, let me say this. We're also experimenting with a physical passport and the ability to embed CKPs within the chip on your passport.
Gotcha.
It's something that we are experimenting with, but very much in its early stages.
Yeah. I mean, why not? I think it makes sense. That'd be cool. I want to be an early citizen.
Like everyone wants to be citizen number one, so I think it just makes sense for us to auction it off. Whoever
Not a bad idea.
for free markets win, hey?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the demand is there. I think this is something that a lot of people are going to go for. I think it just makes sense. And just like you said, too, going back to the identity and passport aspect, there's so many protocols now. There's a lot of flexibility and choices with who you work with, and all of this is or should be at least composable. So you shouldn't have to build this from scratch. You can work with so many people.
Exactly.
So if you're building in centralized identity, if you're building in ZK proofs, reach out to Kim, hit her up.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Please do.
No, I really like that. I think that's awesome. What are you looking at in terms of how is, all these things cost money? How has fundraising been, for example, for this? Are people interested?
So, yeah, we got some money from some angels, but I haven't meaningfully pitched to VCs. I was going to start a raise, and then I spoke to like one or two, and they were excited, but at the same time, um, what I realized is that this is a very different intersection that most VCs are aware of, especially in crypto. And so I get a lot more, like a lot better response from traditional venture
Interesting.
and traditional funds. So that's the route that we will probably be going. We got offered some grants from a few L1s, but we didn't take it because, yeah, it needs to be on ETH. At the end of the day, we cannot build out critical infrastructure on any other network outside of Ethereum right now. So, I
So
mean,
fully ETH based,
yeah,
basically.
pardon?
Fully ETH based, basically.
Uh, for like critical components of it, yes, just from a security point of view.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I could be wrong, but I assume there are more. Yeah, it should be much more options for ZK on ETH than anywhere else right now.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
nice.
That the tooling there is definitely the most mature.
Gotta have the tooling for sure. Very cool. And yeah, it's not. It's a little surprising, but not incredibly surprising that you may end up with more interest from Web two VCs, traditional VCs, because again, this is a problem that everybody has, right? Not just people in crypto. Yeah,
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 exactly. This is it's like one, it's also an onboarding tool for people to use crypto primitives. But look, there's easier ways to make money in this in this space right now. You don't need to go build a whole city. Only if you have childhood trauma, then sure, go do that. But you could just launch like a perp dex or some gambling site and you'll be fine. So, like from a venture perspective, I could totally see why it would be a tough bet for VCs who typically like crypto liquidity events. Yeah, that's definitely not our focus.
and obviously, Kim, we're here to actually change things and not just make people gamble. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Although I was thinking about like launching a casino instead of on-chain.
I mean, every city does need at least one casino, so I get it. I get it. I'm in the Bahamas. We have a lot of casinos. I can't talk bad about it.
Let's see.
That's yeah, I feel like after this I'm going to be thinking even more about this specific tech stack, like what it entails, what comes together, because I think one, in terms of the onboarding, I hadn't even thought about that. You will be onboarding a lot of people onto crypto just by default, which is really cool. Um, and two, yeah, I think that the package, as you said, that combination of different tooling together, I think will be really interesting to write about. For example, I think people will be excited to see all of this come together for sure. Yeah,
Yeah. Let's see how it goes. Right now, I just kind of describe it as your life stack. Basically, what do you need to live your life and what constraints exist that ties you to a specific country or, gets you stuck within a specific system and how we can solve for that to help make your lifestyle completely sovereign. Because we have the internet already, right? The internet is permissionless, it's open. You can build and do anything and become someone on the internet. But that doesn't translate to the IRL stuff. And so I think once we solve for that, um, we're very much on track to kind of mobilizing what it means to be a sovereign individual and bringing this to fruition.
that's awesome. That's really cool. How do you see? So obviously, digital natives will run to this. What do you see in terms of how much you think about that gap specifically between like the digital native people, people who will understand this from the get go, versus the people who aren't, people who are fully outside of this kind of ecosystem? How do you foresee getting them, or are they an eventual target market at all?
Yeah, I see us targeting them just by building a really good product, um, to the point that it's sort of a no-brainer to use. It's the equivalent of like sending a mail in an envelope versus just texting someone. It's like, okay, you can clearly see it's 100x better, faster, cheaper. So why not use it? It's really just like build a great product. And I don't like to say this, but build it and they will come. But this is one of those things where it's such a huge problem that if you do solve it, they do come.
Yeah, that's a fire answer though. But I like that this is something that you're thinking about as well, where you just have to make sure UX is key for this kind of thing, and it is just UX at the end of the day. So
Exactly.
okay,
Exactly.
okay, 5 years from now, or let's say 10 years from now, What does this look like in your head?
Okay, so I actually see Onchain City being recognized diplomatically at the UN level uh, 5 years from now,
Mm,
to the point where we're recognized as an actual nation, that we have our own passport and we can do all of these things without dependencies on host nations, so to speak. Um, so yeah, I see us being a diplomatically recognized nation 5 years from now.
very interesting. Now I need you to elaborate on that. Dive deep, because that is incredibly interesting. I think.
Well, in the
Mhm.
sense that to be a diplomatically recognized nation, mean like you can have your own laws, you can have your own immigration system, you got a seat at the table, etc. You have your own sovereignty as a country. Um, and if we focus on getting as many citizens as possible, we end up having a lot of advocates for this, because now we can go and say, here is 5 million people that are using or that are accessing all of these government services through Onchain City, and there's a clear demand for new types of systems to be built. I could see us getting diplomatic recognition to the point that we have our own passport that could be used to travel.
One that is recognized every what a lot. On
The
that. Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, the great thing about being a digital nation, is that your upper limit is really the amount of people that have access to internet. Um, there's no borders, there's no geography, um, like, so we can scale quite a bit with this and rally the right amount of support to make it happen.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Actually, the beauty of this is that you don't have to think about land. You don't have to think about like geographic issues. You don't have to think about territory disputes or anything like that. It's just the internet is, at least hopefully, and will hopefully continue to be for everybody, no matter where you are. And of course, as we get more and more people, give more and more people access to the internet, because there's still a long way to go there. But that just increases what you can do and what they can do as well at the same time, which is the goal, right? So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I do think the physical component of it is key. But the thing is, like, look, governments are good for a few things, but not all things. They're great at building our roads in some cases, building up infrastructure, utilities, all of like energy requirements, etc. All of like the core things that you would need to live physically. But when it comes to these other things that could be delegated, and I think if we can solve for that, we kind of introduce like this new economic model into society, which I don't remember who it was. I literally learned this term today. I didn't even know there was a term called neo-cameralization. I believe it was created by was it Curtis Yarvin? Or either Curtis or Nick Land. I'm not sure. But apparently it's essentially like treating countries and nation states like a startup. I like had this thought and then I started researching it and I was like, oh, like this thought sort of exists already. So this would be a practical implementation of what that would look like.
I assume those two probably have a very different interpretation of what that is compared to what you do, but that's for a different time. uh, Two very
Probably.
controversial figures, and we won't dive into the politics of it. But but no, that's really interesting because it's like, you know what? I kind of want to throw an abstract question at you really quick,
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
especially talking about like the this idea of how governments interact and land and geography and things like that. even taking away a lot of the potential for every nation has conflict. Nations have conflict with each other. What does oh man, how do I ask this? What does war look like with Onchain City involved, or does it, or do you see it like properly reducing the not the need or but the amount of war between nations?
Very interesting question. Are you asking about war between other nation states or war between Unchained City and other nation states?
More so the former, but also kind of both.
Um, I think it comes down to if one country sees that a lot of value is flowing through on-chain city, like their citizens are using the sovereignty of another country, then you run the risk of that citizen getting banned from interacting with these platforms, just like how they try to like ban Bitcoin or whatever the case may be. Um, but honestly, I don't know. It's probably something to do with the cybersecurity side of things. Estonia had something very similar. So the equivalent of a military in Estonia is actually a cyber task force. They get attacked quite a bit, and so they had to create like this new type of military. It's hard to say at this stage, honestly.
But yeah, I think that makes total sense. Where it'll probably be more a cyber issue. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I would say ZK proofs and FHE are critical privacy technologies that need to be considered. Because someone can hack something and then decrypt the data, that's a huge risk factor there. So yeah, privacy is a huge component of it all.
Yeah, I do like the idea of this kind of as this builds out, you can kind of push I guess, a resurgence in people caring about ZK proofs in general as well, because that privacy aspect is going to be key. Uh, and as unfortunately the crypto space is kind of focused less on fundamentals and like core technologies, this will be a push. I mean, yeah, this will be something for people to say, oh, well, this is actually still really important. We should think about this more and care about this more. And that'll drive everything as well. So that could be really cool.
Exactly.
Nice.
Exactly. And it's kind of just like proven that, okay, you can do all of these things while maintaining privacy so that when they do interact with legacy system, it's just kind of like, whoa, this is not a ZK proof. Like, this doesn't use ZKP or this doesn't have any like meaningful privacy technology embedded into it. Um, you start to get individuals prompting that question more once you prove that the system does work seamlessly with these technologies.
Right. Very cool. So that I think we're pretty much done. I want to throw one of those general end of interview questions at you. What is your if you had to choose one thing, or maybe one or two things, what's the most exciting technology for you right now? It could be a category, it could be a very specific thing or interaction. I know it's kind of vague, but
Oh, I mean, I I would say probably um obviously privacy and hardware. Those to me are like two of and obviously like AI is kind of like a no-brainer. Everything is going to use AI, but I I think those are probably two super interesting areas. It kind of feels like we're going through a renaissance, and so all of the basic fundamental systems are being uh, rewritten. Um, it all comes down to the physical things and what is the infrastructure. is being used to coordinate society. So hardware is a huge component of it. Privacy is a huge component of it. The other thing is probably energy. So I would say those three.
That's cool. I mean, I wasn't expecting hardware, but it does make sense. So it's more of like not so much devices necessarily, more like large scale.
Yeah, like the actual chips and the tooling used within the the hardware. Um, it's kind of interesting to see, like, we're in this information age where everything is being publicized, and so if there's like a backdoor on a specific chip, that will um, that will be eventually exposed. And so there's like a huge focus to open source, like a lot of the hardware components for critical infrastructure, like the robots that will be in our home, like the phones, like yeah, various things. So that to me is interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great point actually, especially just like you said, there's a huge focus on robotics right now. I hadn't been following the open source aspects of that in particular. Obviously, there's a huge open source for AI movement right now. Shout out to DeepSeek. But the robotics I hadn't really thought about in terms of what are you saying there? I'm really curious about that.
Well, I would say it's more like BCIs, bring computer interfaces. I think BCIs are going to become the new mobile device, but let's say you had a BCI and this thing is connected to your brain. It's basically like it's a Neuralink. It can control your thoughts, it can control your actions, it can control all of these things. Like, yes, it 10x's, 100x's our productivity and our capacity and so forth, but at what cost? And so I think there's enough incentive to figure out this problem, and so that's probably the most interesting thing that I'm seeing there. It's like, how do we build devices that just reduces the friction between execution, like thought and execution, even if that means like removing the device altogether and putting something in our head. I don't know if you guys watched the recent Black Mirror episodes, but definitely worth checking out. That future is not too far off.
It's a lot to think about, but like you said, making sure that stuff is open sourced at the very least, so we can again make sure there's no backdoors, make sure one company can't control a bunch of people. And I think what's so great about kind of spending so much time in the crypto space, you kind of get the default is open source. You kind of get used to that, and you kind of want to make sure that other things also have a strong open source focus or background.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, I do think that's a lot of what the crypto community can do is to advocate for cryptography to be privacy cryptography to be incorporated into these hardware devices and systems that will essentially be distributed across all society.
Yeah, I think that's as a unit, as a space, as an industry, that's probably one of the most important things in so many ways. That's excellent. Well, Kim, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been really cool. I've learned a lot. Hope the audience does as well. Where can we find you online?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Sarah X Kimberly on Twitter. If you want to reach out to me, I'm Kim at Onchain City.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Kim.
Bye, guys.